Well, good afternoon, everyone. I will call the meeting to order. Power. So do we have any public comment? Any public comment?
No, not for this meeting.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. So great to see you. Beautiful sunny day. Feels like spring. Our first item is the approval of the March 20th minutes. Hopefully you got a chance to review those. And if so, I would entertain a motion to accept the March 20th board meeting minutes.
And Emily, did we get that one tweak?
Yes, Director Mueller just asked me to clarify the time certain of when the different meetings started and ended.
The other edits?
I move to accept the March 2025 board meeting minutes as updated.
So it's been motioned by Director Mueller, seconded by Director Hawkins to accept the March 2025, March 20th, 2025 board meeting minutes as drafted. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. The board meeting minutes passed unanimously. Thank you. And before we move on to the federal update, Colin, I just wanted to mention, I was talking with Jim. I am going to be working remotely out of state on May 15th, our next meeting. And I believe you have some travel plans, Vice Chair. And so we wanted to see if you would be open to having a virtual meeting that day, because it's really hard to chair. And plus, it gives staff a little bit easier, I think.
Wear my shorts, flip flops.
Yeah. I do have to say, I really love the snacks that you provide for all of us. I did not have lunch and I was like, oh, this is great. So thank you so much. So if you are all amenable to that, then we will make them the May 15th meeting virtual. Excellent. Do we need to do anything?
Yeah,
Well, notice it.
that's fine. And I think while we're on scheduling and get to the order, the June meeting is, we inadvertently scheduled it on Juneteenth, and so we'll be observing a holiday that day. So I need to reschedule that meeting as well. I think we're working on determining exactly what's on the agenda for that to help, but expect some follow-up from me, looking for a meeting time. Probably it needs to be that same week, just kind of threading the needle on the budget timing and the executive director's contract, some things that are coming up at that time. So expect something from me probably mid next week, looking at adjusting that meeting date.
So our board meeting would be virtual on the 15th of May and in person with ESDC on the 19th.
Yes.
The in-person would be here.
Yes.
Okay.
Director, sorry. There's the.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to share with the board that I'm preparing to head out on parental leave, but I plan to stay engaged virtually. So I will be participating virtually for the next few months. And I just, want to let you all know why, but that I don't plan to sort of step back from the board during this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Johannes. We're glad that you can still participate.
Congratulations.
All right. Next up, Colin. Look at you. You're already ready.
Colin, just a couple of introductory remarks before I turn it over to Colin. I think we're all aware there's some uncertainty in Washington, D.C. So Colin's going to go into a little bit more depth about our thinking and the work we're beginning to do as your staff to plan for the uncertainty. But I guess I just wanted to assure you that the senior staff here is watching very carefully, and we're evaluating hiring decisions, spending decisions, and so on. So you may see a little bit of dancing here as we address the uncertainty coming out of Washington. But what I also want to share, Colin will reiterate this, the work we are currently doing is work that is required under any funding source to achieve the objectives of consistent protection across the system. So we're not spending any money that we're not going to end up spending. So we're trying to be very careful. We are going to weigh the federal contribution and how we can manage that. But I'm going to let Paul talk more about the good thinking that the planning and engineering teams are doing with the finance team to try and make sure we get the most out of every penny that we're investing in. That we're working really hard at it. There is a lot of uncertainty, but we're doing our best under those circumstances to be very cautious.
Thanks, Jim. Hello, all. Colin Rowan, Director of Planning and Public Affairs. I'm going to present just a few slides. The last one, I apologize ahead of time. It has a lot of words on it, but it would be even worse just to talk through without the slide. So, for a second. So, as Jim mentioned, there are a lot of uncertainties around federal funding, and we are actively monitoring that. Part of that is with our different partners, City of Portland, other public entities are all exchanging a lot of information right now, and some of it's rumors, some of it is kind of scenario planning. The other thing that we have great support in is a federal advocate that's in DC, that's Julie Minerva with Kirby Clay. She has been instrumental in our whole trajectory working with the federal government, Army Corps of Engineers in particular. And so she has been helping us navigate challenging times. And then internally as staff, we've been having a conversation across the whole organization about what would we do, and doing some scenario planning, what approaches we'll take if there's either delay or cessation of federal funding. And as Jim mentioned, these projects that we have identified are flood safety projects that need to be done. And so it's a matter of how we do them, when we do them, and how we fund them. So currently we're taking a risk-based approach and going through the different projects that we have, everything that's been identified for bond funding, but also taking a look at our capital improvement program and shifting that into a more risk-informed decision-making process. But really for prioritizing these projects through our system of the highest need, the life safety, risk being the highest need, looking at levee fragility and potential pump station failure, which could also lead to life safety as well as property safety issues. So what we have come to is a recommendation of sort of a three-phase approach. And this is largely based on current funding and also just the timing. The next slide's going to go some of the timeline, but there's really no action right now. So the first piece is that if there is less than 1 year of delay, in particular, we're talking about the Portland Metro Levee System project with the Army Corps of Engineers, we'll continue with the PMLS project as is. The reason why is that it is currently funded. It has funding in the federal budget for the design phase that we're currently in. We have provided our local contributions. And so unless if the Army Corps of Engineers is saying that we're stopping, that they're stopping, we'll continue moving as is. If there is, at whatever point we get to sort of a pause, if we're looking at 1 to 3 years of delay, that's when we need to start making decisions around if any of the project elements that are part of that federal project need to be done earlier. And that really is a flood-informed decision. Every year, every moment, not to be too alarmist, but any time that we're not making progress on these important projects, we are at higher flood risk. So really, if there's a pause and it's a 1 to 3 year pause, we're going to need to identify if there's some projects that we can move out on and hopefully get memos of understanding with the Corps to basically say that we would get some credit for basically performing the federal part of the project. And so there are paths to doing that. It's called advance in kind MOUs. And we need to make sure that all of the details are really well laid out so we know exactly what we'd be getting credit for, or at least have our eyes wide open as far as things that we might not get credit for, but we want to do because it addresses safety. This also would be a time that we would be looking at alternative construction scenarios. That is a jumble of words, but what we're really talking about there is the Army Corps of Engineers has identified and will continue to build particular alternatives, ways to address the flood safety issues. They might not be exactly what we would do in all locations if we were designing them ourselves. They're fully responsive to the federal standards. And so we would look at if there's any designs that we would potentially take a different approach to. If we did that, we might forego federal funding or credit, but it would still address that flood safety issue. Once we get to the 4 or more years, and just want to note that that does align with a likely change in or a 2028 election. So that would, if there was delay or cancellation of the project at that point, our recommendation is that we basically look at all of the project components, all the elements within the Portland Metro Levee System project, and we integrate that into our standard capital improvement program. And so those elements get weighed and evaluated just like any of the other projects, and they basically get assigned a score and prioritized based on funding need. And so it might look like different timing than if it was done purely with the federal partnership. And so that would also have the different approaches. So what we do have and known timelines, maybe I should have put those into air quotes. I'm doing air quotes for the public record. The known timelines could shift. There's a lot of detail here, but we're looking at 3 fiscal years, basically 2 fiscal years ahead and 1 fiscal year now that we're basically taking different steps to address. In our current fiscal year, our Oregon delegation to Congress, led by staff in Senator Wyden's office, are writing a joint letter to the administration to ensure that the Army Corps' work plan funds keep flowing for the Portland Metro Levee System study. So all of the Oregon delegation to Congress is going to be in support of that. Throughout the spring, we're going to be working with our staff, working with other partners around the region to get requests in for congressionally directed spending. So congressionally directed spending is an earmark. And so that is really our best path into the FY26 funding for appropriations. Previously, we had the luxury, I guess, of being in the president's recommended budget. We do not expect to be in the president's recommended budget for FY26. So our best path in is through congressionally directed spending. And so we'll be working, each member of Congress only has a certain number of directed spendings that they can dictate or direct. So we'll be working on that. So that's for continued future funding, moving from design into construction. So the first phase of construction would be covered in some of that funding. And then our biggest ask is really for FY27. We continue on the path to get a construction new start. And so a construction new start is a designation with a capital N and a capital S for new start, which makes an important move from our current bucket of funding at the Corps, which is under general investigations, and it moves it into their general construction. So it is a very nuanced thing, but what that means is that once you're in that general construction funding bucket, the Corps traditionally has really moved all of those projects forward for construction. And so we get out of the annual cycle of basically having to scrap for the money. So it's our biggest lift other than getting designated for this study. And so we continue on the same timeline, and that hasn't shifted. And we'll be looking to all of you as the board, some of your organizations for support, but that FY27 new start is really key for us moving from design to construction of the project. So that is what is known right now. I reserve the right for us to update that as shift, but as of April 17th at 3:34, that is accurate. Yeah, want to open up for any questions.
I guess that a point to emphasize is that 4 or 5 years from now, if we discover the loss of that federal revenue, we'll be talking with you about when and how to pursue additional federal funding. So that will come back before we come up with something. But I will suggest to you that in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about our local voters and having a good conversation with them in 5 or 7 years. So just socializing that concept with you all.
Questions for Colin?
I hope that was helpful. A lot more to say about this and more to come. And happy to talk with you privately. And again, I'll have more information at the beginning of May after I return from DC. Have a better sense of where we're at in congressional offices and the committee staffs and the core.
Thank you.
So is it accurate to say that while it's creating a lot of uncertainty and trying to understand what is or isn't happening, it's not currently stopping any of the work that we're trying to move forward on?
That is correct, but I will note, so this was largely, the new start, and because of the scale of the Portland Metro levy study, this update's largely focused on that. We have other federal dollars that we are either currently using or have identified, and the biggest one that I think some of you have probably heard about with the change is FEMA has or had Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Grant Program, which was a pretty huge program. We had identified a number of projects for BRIC, that's the acronym, funding. We are currently designing the PIR pump station using FEMA Hazard Mitigation Grant Program funds, not BRIC funds. So that design is funded, and that's basically like a state formula fund. So it's not as competitive, and so it's not currently at risk. So we should be able to continue doing the design. We will need to identify how we're going to pay for the construction of that project, because previously we were, the intention was to apply for a BRIC grant for that, which was never guaranteed, but it was still our plan to pursue.
Is that funding not included?
It does not exist, and they actually, for BRIC construction grant recipients from 2020 to 2023, they canceled pre-approved funding.
So in your inbox, when you look at it, you will see a public comment that also raises questions about our operating revenues. And I want to emphasize, both for the staff who may be watching, but for you as well, that our operating revenues are secure and stable. So our day-to-day operations are not impacted by these things. Our capital dollars may be impacted. Everyone's going to get paid. We continue to be prepared to respond to flood emergencies. We're monitoring and maintaining the system just like we always have. And in fact, we're better today than we were a year ago because we have more and more stable revenue. And we do have 150 million in additional capital dollars that we didn't used to have. So if you're on a curve, we're well above where we were, even with all of the risks and uncertainties. So I just want to emphasize that we're in a pretty good place. We have uncertainty on our capital program.
Sure. And is it right to assume that we can also pursue our other legislative commitments?
Yes. Yeah. So we are working in Salem. We continue to seek probably what will amount to 20 million is where we're at, I think, at this point. And we were looking for 25 million in the next biennium. I think it's fair to say there's uncertainty there too, but we, in the words of Monty Python, we're not dead yet. We have a lot of support from members of the local delegation and others to continue to support our work. So we won't know until the legislature happens. So far, so good.
Thank you for the presentation. In regards to the scenario that you outlined, if there's potentially a delay, we don't know how long it is, the option of potentially doing advanced work per MOU would, if that comes to pass, what's the soonest that work would need to occur? Would it be in our FY27? And I guess what I'm getting at is, would it have any budget implications in the upcoming fiscal year that we foresee? Would it be further out?
It would be further out. My understanding that we're still finishing the design phase. And so that's, there are things around real estate and other capital that need to be done in advance of doing the actual construction and moving dirt. And there is a small section that's the first project the Army Corps would like to get started within that could happen before we get a construction new start that helps us move it into the construction new start. So that's the only piece that could potentially be up ahead. But yeah, the current budget as proposed supports what we need to do in whatever scenario we have, at least for next fiscal year.
Keep up with the course design
Exactly.
that they're already funded to do. Could be that the administration would take those funds away and then we would come see you and say, okay, relatively small portion of our overall capacity is being devoted to that. We are tracking the Corps, managing with their design person, all of that, but that would be no indication that's going to happen. The Corps does not want that to happen.
In that vein, I think you mentioned if we were to get to 1 to 3 year delay timeframe, that we would revisit the design portion potentially without the Corps. If that, or I may have heard it wrong, but essentially, how would we still be designing to the accreditation standards required? Even if we didn't work directly with them, because we wouldn't, if we didn't have access to them in some form for design.
Thank you for that question. Yes, so I think there's two things that we would need to meet at a minimum. So one is the accreditation standard, which honestly is a lower standard. It's largely insurance driven, but we would also need to meet the design standards that the Army Corps has provided. That would allow us to either, they would be able to say that that portion of the project meets what they would have built, and therefore the authorized project, which happened in 2022, the whole project was authorized for construction, then they could say that we have met that minimum. And then that also allows us to get to that sort of uniform level of protection that's been identified. So the other projects that would tie into that we wouldn't have variation in that level of protection. Federal project or federally partnered projects were built adjacent to it. We would want to make sure that everything tied in.
So we might need federal standards. We might use different designs to get there, I think, is because the Corps has certain rules it has to follow. And we wouldn't need to follow those rules, but we do have to meet the standard. I hope that makes sense. Our architect would be better than theirs.
Thanks. Is there a reliable way to prospectively anticipate how long a delay might be? I mean, I get if it's been 3 years, you'll know it was a 3-year delay, but are there any kind of indicators or triggers that if we X, Y, or Z does or doesn't happen, oh, it's going to be at least 2 years?
It's the federal budget process.
Federal budget process, I think if there's huge headwinds on that FY27 new start, because it's really about in the federal budget process, how they're developing the work plan, maintaining some priority there. Flood safety is a bipartisan thing. And so I think, the things that are behind our levee system, that's the federal project was really, the determination for the federal project to move forward was, do these projects benefit sort of the federal interest, and not just a local or regional interest? And so they did find that there's a federal benefit for making these investments. So the hope is that that continues to have priority in developing work plan.
Relative to our mission, including equity and climate impacts, are we protected at the state, federal, or the state county level, special district level, or does the federal changes affect us there at all?
That around what
Or
language?
how we do the work we do. So the flood safety work that we do is like one piece of it, but then there's also like how we do that work with the prioritization of equity and climate impacts.
I can take, okay.
It's in our statute. We have to do the work. We have heard of other agencies being targeted by this administration because they have those words in their mission. We can't remove those words without an act of the Oregon legislature. So we are both continuing firmly ahead on those mission points because we think it's important and it's the right thing to do and it's good for the district and it's good for flood safety. And we are highlighting those features of our project that appeal to the current administration, things like Army Air National Guard and transportation systems and drinking water and electricity hubs and things that matter to the national security and to international trade. So we are attempting to be nimble and consistent with our values and our mission. I hope that answers your question. We have some risk, yes, but we're going to accept that risk because it's the right thing to do unless you direct me otherwise.
Looks like you answered all the questions. Oh, no.
I was just gonna, you'll send out a copy of these.
Yes, and make sure this is as of today. So make sure there's a timestamp on there too.
There'll be an update by the time you send it out.
And there's a little bit in my ED report there that summarizes this if that's useful to you.
Thank you, Colin.
Thank you.
Next up, we're going to hear from Tracy. She's going to talk about the executive director review.
I would offer to the board at any time you would like me to leave the room, I am more than willing to do that. I want to be helpful and supportive of your efforts.
So I think today we're just talking about the process of this.
Yes, yeah. Give me 1 second.
So I think it's fine for you to be here.
Or create space if you need it.
Anybody else has objections?
Well, good afternoon. My name is Tracy Almedo. I am the HR manager here at the district. I've been at the district since 2019. And I have part of my work is to support in the facilitation of the executive director's evaluation process. So we have done this a few times with MCD board, but I'm here to introduce it to you all. So in your board packet, you'll find a 2-page summary that outlines the process, including an overview, a timeline, categories that will be scored. It's page 5 and 6. I'd like to begin by just acknowledging that providing feedback is best practice. We actually just did a training, the management team did a training on feedback yesterday, so this is right on target. But in this case, it's also a requirement by per the executive director's administrative contract with the board. So we do need to do the evaluation. So just a general overview, the performance evaluation is an opportunity for the executive director to engage in a one-on-one conversation with the board about their performance and how that performance aligns with the district's mission, vision, and goals. I want to first just overall go over the process, and then we'll dive into the timeline. The process begins with the executive director completing a self-assessment. So at that same time, I'll be facilitating the 360 evaluation process. And so the self-assessment is a form that the executive director completes, and it's a review on his progress for last fiscal year's goals, as well as the proposed goals for the upcoming year. And then the 360 is a more holistic view of performance. It gathers input from staff, the board, and then external stakeholders. There are 5 general categories that are rated in the 360 that you all will receive: strategic planning, leadership, advocacy and consensus building, social justice, and interpersonal communication. And those are all categories that are responsibilities under the executive director's job. So that's where they come from. All of the areas will have an opportunity to provide narrative comment regarding major strengths or growth opportunities. So you will have an opportunity to rate them as either exceeds, satisfactory, needs improvement, or not observed. And then you'll also have an opportunity to provide comment on those areas. Once the 360 feedback comes back and the self-assessment, I will synthesize that information, specifically the 360 feedback, and then draft the performance evaluation form. And the draft evaluation will include the information from the self-assessment, so his goals, his proposed goals, and then the feedback gathered from 360. And that draft evaluation will be shared with the board and discussed in executive session. And so I think the timeline is what we want to move on to next. So this is the official kickoff of the process. We're reviewing it. I will follow up with a Microsoft form that includes that 360 feedback. And you will all see that in your email. You'll have until April 30th to return it. And then I will also have executive director complete his self-assessment, and then he'll also have until April 30th to complete that. That'll give me a little bit of room to just gather all of the information and prepare it for you all. By May 8th, I expect to have it all complete and together, and then have it sent about a week ahead of the May 15th board meeting, where you have some scheduled time for the conversation with Jim. I can sit in for a part of that meeting, but it could also be just you and Jim during that session as well. I think I had a chance to connect with Director Stegman. She had advised that I could sit in for at least a portion of that should you all have process questions. And then we also have a June board meeting that is a continuation of the evaluation. And so the May 15th will be just reviewing that draft initial feedback. There are also adjustments to the contract that need to be made. And so May 15th, you'll have that initial conversation. And then by June, we'd like to finalize it. And any updates, contract adjustments will need to be voted in public session. And just to confirm, contract updates need to be voted in public session. Any questions? Yes.
The contract adjustments that they need to be made, or they're being proposed, or can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so there is one contract adjustment that needs to be made, and I would like to request Lori to speak a little bit about it because it's regarding an IRS requirement.
So in the contract, we have a section that allows for cash out of vacation. And we identified this as an issue that doesn't comply with IRS regulations. So we need to update that section of the contract so that Jim is not subject to constructive receipt regulations, which means even if he didn't cash it out, it would be taxable. We don't want that to happen. So we are going to work on that portion of the contract and make sure that we get that updated.
As I understand it, essentially aligns my cash out opportunities with others in terms of the timing and the process I go through to cash out. I have some different provisions than the rest of the staff that we can talk about. But.
Right. So we aligned the policy for staff in the last year to make sure that we were in compliance with those regulations, but we did not reopen Jim's contract, but we did have the intent of doing that, getting that corrected this year.
So, given that, I love that we're doing 360 reviews, but given that this board hasn't been here for the entire fiscal year, will you be sending the evaluations to former board members as well as the current board members?
To you guys, I'm at your service. I'm open to feedback and want you to feel like you've done a good job making sure I'm doing okay. And if I'm not, I hope you will manage me appropriately. So whatever I can do to support you, whatever the staff can do to support you.
What's the time frame of this evaluation period? It's
May to May.
Okay. Yeah, so
June.
the last fiscal year, so July 1st to June 30th. We just have to start it a little bit early so that we're done by June 30th.
So it's this fiscal year through June 30th of 2025.
because I was just thinking about the board question about, when,
Sort of half and half.
yeah.
Are employees a part of the 360 review as well?
We do send it to staff level, manager level, board members, and then a few other select external stakeholders. So we've been working with a consultant, management team consultant. So we'll be sending it to her. And then there were also additional suggestions from partner agencies. So there's a few others that will also be receiving it.
Prior years, it was the MCDD board that conducted the process.
They did do 360s with some urban board members last year. I believe they sent it to all the board members. I don't remember.
I think, yes, it was a lot of feedback and there were so many board members. So,
You guys could review all that too, if you'd like. Again, whatever you need.
Director Eisbeis,
Uh,
did you have
I had the same question that Director King posed, and I think from my perspective, I don't feel equipped to provide feedback for the period that I wasn't here. I recognize, I think we have 3 board members who served on the interim board. Is that correct? So I think it's a good question to contemplate.
Tracy, we had talked about, I thought you said that there'd be an opportunity when you talked about stakeholders. But what was the caveat? Because I think you were trying to, at least in the topic we were talking about, is you were trying to find stakeholders. There were like community stakeholders, but that weren't on the board because you wanted them to be separate.
yeah, no, so it was actually a conversation with Director Ralston. He had suggested some stakeholders that were part of the community, but were not a part of the board, but still involved with the district work and had just kind of kept their thumb on the pulse of what we've been doing. And so I think he shared a suggestion about Oscar at NIA. And so that was one person. So yeah, I think we are open to recommendations here. If you have anyone else that you all would like for this to go out of.
I'll share with Tracy a couple of options, but again, I'm happy to get feedback.
I mean, I think it would be good to, I don't think we necessarily need to have every previous board member participate, but I think we have a sampling, and I don't know like what an ideal number. Like, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 from the previous board, if they'd be willing, because I do think that that's valid to have that historical perspective.
And I'd be happy to share the previous reviews with you all if you want to read them. That could be useful.
I appreciate Chair Steckman, what I think you're alluding to, which is the interim board was much larger in terms of number of board members, and though staff will be synthesizing the feedback that you receive, it might be appropriate to make sure that, given that the fiscal year is roughly split between the permanent board and the interim board, to have a proportionate sampling. So maybe it's a matter of just sort of randomly selecting a certain number of additional folks, since we have 3 members who served throughout the fiscal year.
Okay. So Tracy, and I'm happy, and I know Director King was also, I'm just trying to think of, maybe the people that were here previously, like if you could send us a list, and then I think, we could collectively, choose 3 or 4 or however, whatever that magic number is. I know that it was probably pretty overwhelming in the past because the numbers were so large. So anyway, like I think we could be objective enough to try to pick people that we felt could give an objective review. And yeah, Director, can you be willing? And then Director Miller. So just us 3, right? We could help select those folks if you'd like.
That was great. Thank you for the help.
I guess what I was thinking is with the 3 of us that had the first half, if we could potentially take 3 more. And then we have everybody here that's part of the other half. you know.
That's a good cross section, I think. So maybe 3 more.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
And
To answer your call, I mean, they got out, so.
question about some of the, I guess, background material. It may be in here and I miss it, but will there be a copy of the existing contract distributed to us in advance so we can read through?
Both the existing contract and a red line so that you can see the proposed adjustments.
Questions? All right, thank you.
For doing the work and getting some feedback from me. That's always very helpful. And well, it's not always enjoyable. It's super important and really, really valuable. So I appreciate you guys going through the effort and take seriously the feedback that comes in. So.
All right, thank you. Right, next up, we have Amber. It is real estate act.
Hello, everybody. Haven't seen many of you since I think your first official board meeting in January. So I'm sure you're all seasoned by now and feeling very comfortable. So this is actually kind of setting the stage for continuing kind of our real estate acquisition planning efforts. I wanted to introduce our consultants that we're working with, Common Street Consulting. They're going to be joining us virtually and kind of providing a real estate 101 presentation that's going to kind of let you know how our process looks, let you kind of have informed decision makings as I bring acquisitions and proposals to you, and kind of let you know what, from a property owner standpoint, what they'll be experiencing when we say we identify a property for acquiring through easements, right-of-way acquisition, all those. So let me introduce Kari Lowe and Jesse Medina from Common Street, and I will let them both introduce themselves, and then we can have the presentation and a little Q&A.
Sounds good. Thank you, Amber. I don't think we can share our screens to be able to show the presentation. Jesse has it to share if we can give her permissions.
Okay, I think it lit up for me here. Let's see. Okay,
There we go.
showing up for everyone? Okay.
I'm not sure if we'll be able to see hands. So if anybody has a question as we're talking, maybe toss it in the chat or just shout it out and we can answer it as we go. So I'm Kari Lowe. I'm the CEO of Common Street Consulting, and I've been doing right-of-way in Oregon and the Pacific Northwest for about 20 years now. And then Jesse?
Yeah, and I'm Jesse Medina, project manager with Common Street.
Very good. So real quickly, we don't want to bore you to death, but right-of-way can be kind of it's an unknown for most people, and it's scary to think that the government can come and take your property. So really quickly, I wanted to go over the laws and regulations that govern what we do. These laws are made to protect landowners, not to protect the agency. So at the very, very most basic level, it's the Fifth Amendment that says that the government has to pay just compensation to a landowner. So that's what kind of kicks things off for us. In the 70s, and then it was amended in the 80s, was the Uniform Relocation Assistance and Real Property Acquisition, that whole long thing. This is really what guides us. We've put recitations in there for the specific pieces of our offer process that is dictated by the URA, is what we call it. The next one that we abide by is the Uniform Appraisal Standards for Federal Land Acquisition. And so this is specifically because we have the Corps as a partner on this program. And so because of this UAS FLA, there's specific types of appraisals that we have to use. And so we'll be abiding by that. There is an Oregon revised statute that also says that you'll be guided by the ODOT right-of-way manual. So even though this isn't a transportation project, ODOT has a pretty detailed right-of-way manual. And so we fashion our process off of the ODOT right-of-way manual also. And then finally, we're also, Civil Rights Act, Fair Housing Act, all of those things come into play also with the laws as they were written for the URA. So more fundamentals, just a little bit of some definitions here. Eminent domain is the legal power that the government has. Condemnation is the process that we go through. So as those terms come out, again, these laws are intended to protect the landowner. As Common Street, Jesse and I have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that the district doesn't overpay or give a windfall to the landowners, and we have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure the landowners get everything they're entitled to. So, we ensure that both are treated well. The laws are designed to make sure landowners are treated fairly, consistently, equitably. They're designed to encourage negotiations, not to go straight to court. We want to minimize litigation. In my 20 years, I would say less than 1% of files go to condemnation. And even that small percentage that do make it there, they usually get settled before they go to court. Our process is also to promote public confidence. We want to make sure when we're done with this program that the landowners that are impacted feel as good or better about the district than before this project. And then we need to make sure that anybody that's displaced by the project, which I don't think we actually will have any residential displacements, but we want to make sure that there aren't disproportionate injuries there. So we purchase right-of-way in fee, which means we buy all of the rights for either the entire parcel or we buy all of the rights for a strip of the parcel. We also buy permanent easements, which means we buy most of the rights, but maybe not all of them. And the landowner can retain some of the rights for that parcel. And then we'll also be buying temporary easements, which generally run from 2 to 5 years, depending on the project. And it's to build the project. And then when the project is done, that temporary easement goes back to the landowner. Anytime you need to step on private property, you need to have some sort of right. So if we're doing pre-project investigations for wetlands or cultural investigations or something like that, we have a right of entry process that is used, and that allows the project team to be able to go on site to do investigations to make sure that we're designing the project in a correct way. And then we have a picture here. This is kind of interesting. Eminent Domain Winery. This guy had a business in Portland that was acquired as part of a public project, and he used his relocation funds from that business and started a winery outside of Newburgh called Eminent Domain, and it's pretty good wine. So kind of fun.
Okay, so what can landowners expect? So when we present the offer and negotiate with landowners, well, it's our job to inform them of their rights and make sure they understand the project and offer that's being presented and their options if they disagree. It's our responsibility to act respectfully and to respond empathetically to their concerns, whether it's the amount or an impacted tree, right, that has been on the property for years. But like Kari had mentioned, we also protect the district's interests. So in regards to community perception and cost and urgency, we are the hub of the wheel, so to speak. So we coordinate information and questions with landowners, the district, survey, design, construction, etc. So landowners can expect consistent outreach and an opportunity to connect in person, over the phone, or virtually, kind of whatever works best for them. And they'll get a complete packet of documents and information that our agents will walk them through. So we're going to take a quick look at the a look at the right-of-way process and what the property owner's role is, if any, at each step. So First things first, right-of-way acquisition starts at step 1 when we have the final legal descriptions and sketch map exhibits. Before this, right-of-way is kind of providing advisory support to design and planning, doing tasks such as landowner liaison or rights of entry for environmental investigations. We will provide a programming estimate, which is step 2, and this includes all right-of-way costs, so labor, expenses such as appraisal and title reports, as well as legal and contingency costs. Step 3 is where we are right now in this process. So after the resolution of need is approved, which will allow the district to condemn if necessary, we will move to step 4 and send out general information notices. Now, there's nothing that property owners need to do with this notice. It is informational only and indicates 2 things. So 1, that this project is moving forward, and 2, if they'll be required to relocate. Also, at this time, we will contact property owners over the phone to introduce ourselves. If we haven't already, confirm addresses, confirm who will need to sign the documents, and kind of explain what they can expect from the right-of-way process. So then we move to step 5, which is appraisal notice to proceed. After the general information notices go out, the appraiser is going to send a 15-day notification letter, which is a requirement of the URA. And this letter gives the property owner notice of the appraisal and an opportunity to attend the inspection. So at this point, the property owner can call the appraiser directly and schedule a time for them to come out and perform the inspection while the property owner is there. If the property owner doesn't respond to that 15-day letter, the appraiser will inspect the property from the right-of-way. Steps 6 and 7 are the actual appraisal and appraisal review. The appraisal will determine just compensation by finding the fair market value. And because of the 5th Amendment of the Constitution, it is a federal requirement when purchasing land or rights for a public project. The appraisal is then reviewed by another independent third-party appraiser. In this project, the appraisals will be Yellow Book because it is a core requirement. So once the appraisal and appraisal review come back, we move to steps 8 and 9 and compile the offer packets based off the appraisal and the review. And that packet includes all federal and state required documents. We will always contact the property owner to meet with them in person to present the offer. But if that's not an option or the property owner declines to meet, we mail it certified. So it is a federal requirement to allow property owners enough time to review the offer. Oregon state law provides a minimum 40 days, and this just means that the district cannot file for condemnation until 40 days past the date on the offer letter. Most property owners do not sign within 40 days, and it's much more realistic to say that negotiations take around 90 days, sometimes upwards of 120. So during negotiations, we have, consistent communication with the property owner and build upon the rapport that we've established up until this point. It's at this stage particularly where we want to make sure we prioritize response times with the project team to make sure negotiations move forward as smoothly and with as little delay as possible. Finally, step 10, the district will be in possession of the needed property rights after the documents are recorded and the property owner is paid. If negotiations reach an impasse, the file will be turned over to the district for mediation. And if condemnation is pursued, the original offer amount is deposited into the court, which allows the project to move forward while the file works through that process. So that's a very quick rundown of that. Mo money, mo problems. These are the areas that we see become issues the most. One, offer amount is too low, very common to see. Communication breakdowns, like I mentioned, once we get into negotiations, there can be a lot of delays, sometimes from the property owner side and sometimes from the project team side. So it's really important to have that consistent feedback and workflow of communication going. And then there is often a mistrust of government. and government overreach, like Kari had mentioned earlier.
Any questions so far?
No.
I will just kind of say, this is kind of the end of it, I believe. You know, we work really hard to make sure that landowners feel respected, and that they can trust what we say, what the district says, and that if we say we're going to do something, we're going to do it. That doesn't always mean that they get what they want out of the whole process, but we want to make sure that folks understand why they don't get what they want if we can't give it to them. Yeah, question.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick one. So if there is any sort of breakdown in the communication, or if it looks like things are headed toward to mediation or condemnation, where in the process is the board notified, if at all, of any issues in the process?
So we'd probably go through all of the negotiations to where we kind of hit an impasse where we'll be talking with Amber and Mark, you know, multiple times a week up to this point. So Amber, you might be able to answer that question better, but I would think at the point that we're beginning to reach an impasse, or we think we might be there, that there would be larger discussions.
Yes, and we also retain some great legal resources, which you guys have, I think, met before, but we would involve them at this point too. And so we would figure out how the board was involved in that process.
Question, thank you. I understand how fair market value appraisals arrived at, but how in this process is our equity issues, you know, emotional, community, those other kinds of values valued and negotiated?
That's the hardest part, is they can't be. We can pretty much put a dollar amount on everything except for emotions. Loss of business is something that's not compensable by law. So, so that emotional attachment to things really can't be compensated for. That doesn't mean that we don't have an ability to negotiate with a landowner. We would just be negotiating on other aspects of the property.
And there are other options to use, such as obligation agreements. You know, if there is something that the property owner really wants to protect, like I mentioned, a tree, landscaping, whatever, we can work with the design team to obligate that's protected during construction. So there are, like Kari said, options to negotiate with that. It just can't be compensated for monetarily.
We had as an example, we had a parcel recently that had this massive oak tree that was, you know, 100 years old or something. It was just gorgeous, and a historic barn. And our original design hit both of those. And the landowner was understandably not pleased with that design. And so as we worked with them, we couldn't come up with a design that would miss both, but we were able to work out with the landowner, which one do you want to save? You know, and so we essentially redid the design to meet the landowner's need. And we ended up saving the barn.
And I might say that's why it is also really important to bring on this sort of expertise at this level in the design process, because these sort of nuanced things really can be an important process in advancing design work. The design team isn't necessarily paying attention to a line in a matter of feet. That can mean a big difference for a property owner. And so that is what I am really helpful to have them on. Also, our outreach and communications plan is also really important at this point too. The amount of information that we're doing. You know, tonight, Margot and Mark are going out to the Bridgeton neighborhood and talking more about some of the updates there. That type of updates and information is really important too, because it's kind of setting the stage on how we're interacting with property owners.
So as a follow-up question, and thank you for that answer. From your understanding, would this board be constrained to only compensate based on the appraisal, or is that just normal practice? And could this board venture beyond the fair market value to acknowledge those other community values, et cetera?
Yeah. I would say a good 60 to 65% of the offers we made are negotiated higher than the original offer amount. So when we make the offer, it has to be for at least the appraised amount as confirmed by the appraisal review. As a district, we could decide to make the offer higher if we wanted to. And there is the opportunity to negotiate higher prices with the landowners. That's really going to be up to the district and the board how they want to do that. There is some strategy with all of that. You know, you don't want to jump in necessarily on the very first landowner and, you know, go way above original offer because people talk. And so, you know, you set a precedence early on if you negotiate too high. We had a recent, down here in Marion County, we had a recent situation where the housing department, housing portion of Marion County significantly overpaid for a piece of property. We needed to acquire a piece of property then for a water system. And because of this one overpayment by the housing department, the landowner ended up, our offer was 500,000. He ended up getting 1.6 million because the county had set a precedence. And there was no way to justify that dollar amount with an appraisal or any sort of documentation. So you just need to be a little careful and a little strategic about it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. I might just note too that we have also identified some high-risk properties through some of our flood risk management programs, correct? So we do know that there is some long lead times in there. We do know that there is some relocation cost associated with some of these parcels as well. And so we are thinking about that in our planning process too.
Calkins, and remind me the budget source for land acquisition.
Pardon?
The budget source, where did the dollars come from?
We have a couple of different outputs. We have a real estate through the Portland Metro Levy System program, and we also have an easement program as well.
Geo bond, general fund, combination.
All a combination, mostly GeoBond if it's Portland Metro Levy.
Elaine, did you have a question?
Yeah, when you said high risk property, do you mean high risk of being a complicated transaction or high risk of it's at a high flood risk?
Yes. So there is ones that are very, very critical to our projects moving forward, and possibly kind of known parcels that have maybe been known to be public disruptors in the past and maybe need to have a nuanced approach too.
Dr. Ralston?
Yeah, another quick question. Do these processes and laws apply to acquiring easements as well as purchases?
Yes.
Okay, so if that's the case, just relative to the board, it may be worthy of a discussion sometime, I don't know, this summer or whatever around, does the district have a preference to purchase and own property versus just acquiring easements and not owning outright, you know, a deed on a piece of property and all the liabilities and encumbrances that go with that. And talking with Jim a little bit in the last week about this, you know, there's maybe a sequence of a few acquisitions or a few transactions, I'll put it that way, over the next couple of years, I guess, right? And I'm just wondering, or we ought to think about whether the board should maybe have a briefing on the benefits or the detriments of owning versus holding easements. Long-term liability of owning, especially marginal properties that may not be, you know, real fungible on the market, can become a real burden on a balance sheet, just liability and all that. Just bringing it up as a potential topic for the board.
I would just say the current direction I'm providing to staff is we want to own as little as possible. We're not land management agencies. We move water. We have some critical assets that we need to own and have access to, but we're really going to aim more towards the easements and temporary acquisitions and partnerships for restoration programs and so on, where we really don't want to be long-term stewards of owned land. If you direct me otherwise, we can change that direction, but we're best at moving water and doing that in a more responsible way with our new mission, but we don't want to own a lot of land over time.
And think about it too, places where we have pump stations, those are parcels that we need to own. A lot of our work, a lot of our O&M work that we do along our levee and through the drainage system is definitely completed through our easements and stuff. But I might say, as many of you heard in January, is these easements are very old. They're from the early 1900s all throughout. And we've done gap analysis, and part of this is shoring up our easements, because as you've heard, anywhere that we are supposed to be doing work, we need to be having an agreement in place. And so this work is a long-term effort. This isn't going to be completed in overnight or even really over a couple of years. This is a long-term effort.
The last piece I wanted to highlight is the board still retains approval of anything over $100,000. So if we're going to be acquiring something that costs more than that, you guys are going to have to vote to approve it. So that's another role that you will have going forward on any of these acquisitions. We may package some up in a decision package for you, but again, we don't have authority to spend more than $100,000 without a vote.
Just if I'm understanding this right, essentially any one of these transactions is a 6-month process or more.
Could be, yes.
As a general rule of thumb, we say from the time we get the legal description, which tells us the area that we need to acquire, that we need 9 to 12 months. We can do it in as little as 6. What's going to be interesting is the Corps is going to be the one that does the appraisal review. They've got an attorney there. And so they've said there's a 2-week turnaround on that, which is great. But if they end up a little constrained due to some of the changes that have been going on there, that, the schedule could get extended.
And Director Mueller, this is also a lot of this effort is getting pushed forward a lot for the PMLS work, but I might say that this is much needed for many of our flood risk management programs. And so I do want to keep that as whether or not we're moving things forward associated with the Corps, there is that standard as we're laying out here. But then we also have an additional things that we need to think about as well. And Mark, I know you might have had a couple. I saw your hand up as well.
Letting Amber take the front. I'm the project manager for the project. One thing I wanted to assure you all, characterize in general. We're going to provide some more education on the individual properties, but I've heard some discussion or concern about equity and folks' emotional negotiations and things like that. The good news is, in general, there's one area that has a large residential component, but we're not really seeking to do any fee title acquisitions there. And I think that'll really, if we do anything on folks' property, it's temporary work area easements to tie in the project. But we hope that, there will be some issues, such as Kari mentioned, in terms of trees, landscaping, and other infrastructure on their properties. But things could change, but in terms of how the grading works out and how that affects people's property. But in general, there's no fee title, and we're not really going to be substantially affecting or relocating folks in those areas. So I think that's a important when we look at the perspective in terms of how we affect residential owners.
A couple of exceptions, but mostly we're tuning up and strengthening our current easement structure.
Yes, and we will have a couple of parcels that no matter what happens, we have identified these parcels as high risk. They need to occur for resiliency projects as well. And currently we already are notifying, property owners through our existing rights. So currently we are actually doing rights of entry to collect data through survey and wetland delineation work, all of this types of things. So we are notifying with existing rights we have, but then we do have areas where we need to shore up them.
One last thing to plant in your head. I don't have the percentages at my fingertips, but our friends at the Port of Portland, our friends at Metro, our friends at the county, our friends at the city of Portland own a lot of this stuff too. So we are hopeful they will be thoughtful and cooperative and efficient in tuning up these easements, because these flood safety benefits really accrue to the cities as well. So that will help. It doesn't mean this won't be complex.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Amber. Thank you, Kari. Thank you, Jesse. Appreciate the quick lesson on right-of-way land acquisition. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you
Have
for
a
having
wonderful
us.
evening.
Yeah. Okay, next on our agenda is our first executive session. And I'm going to read the script that goes with that. And I will go ahead and start that. The Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District Board will now meet in executive session under 192.6602F, which allows the board to meet in executive session to discuss attorney-client communication. Designated staff and consultants, as well as representatives of the news media, shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All others should leave the meeting space. I think everyone's staff. Board members and representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on or otherwise disclose any of the deliberations or anything said about these subjects during the executive session, except to state the general purpose of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. At the end of the executive session, we will return to public session. We estimate this will be approximately 20 minutes. And so I'm turning it over to I will call back order. And with that, I will turn it over to Lori to give us a financial report. Thank you.
Auditors are online. Go. They're ready.
This is the only time when I can tell when they have to stop, right?
Right.
Good afternoon. Your board packet includes the February 2025 financial report for the urban district, which includes both monthly and fiscal year-to-date financial information for the consolidated district. Let's take a look at some of the key areas of the report. Next slide, please. The district has $15.8 million in revenue for the fiscal year to date, which aligns with the fact that collections are fully underway for our major sources of revenue. With collection of property assessments close to complete and 2 quarters of flood safety benefit fee also collected. The flood safety benefit fee is billed and collected quarterly. Property assessments are collected by the county on the property tax bill, which is due annually on November 15th. You can see that we've collected $9.2 million in assessments through February, which is the full amount of the annual assessment that we anticipate collecting this year. We've billed and collected the vast majority of the first 2 quarters of the flood safety fee, which is billed directly to cities and the county for unincorporated areas in the district. Grant revenues include state dollars for the 13th Avenue Pipe Project of $720,000 and for accreditation projects of $694,000, and from FEMA for the PIR pump station project of $564,000. And thus far, we are not having difficulties collecting more FEMA dollars, but we will continue to monitor that. And I think as we talked about last month, the city of Portland is the pass-through agency for us with that FEMA grant. And the city of Portland actually advanced us $160,000 to allow us to pay for our invoices while we waited for receipt of those grant funds. So we do have some room to monitor and make sure that we continue to be able to collect for the dollars that we're spending on that project. Interest rates have continued to be a bit higher than anticipated in the budget, so our earnings are higher than budget, but the state is reducing that rate quite regularly at this point. So we are not anticipating that our rate will continue to be at that higher level. So they adjust the rate down as they're experiencing those market fluctuations. Intergovernmental agreements include $722,000 from the city of Portland and $162,000 from the Port of Portland. Next slide, please. This slide shows the general fund spending by budget appropriation line. That budget appropriation line will become important to you as you look at adopting the budget in June. So we'll be talking about this again. These are the appropriation amounts that we're required to stay within in order to comply to Oregon local budget law. First, you'll see the annual budget by appropriation line. That's the first column. Then you'll see that we've allocated the budget by month to support your review of spending levels on a monthly basis. And so that second column shows the year-to-date budget allocation through February. The next column is the actual spending year-to-date. And the monthly variance for February year-to-date is in that last column. And you can see that there are positive variances for the month on every appropriation line. That means our spending is below budget, which is a good thing. We want to continue to be below budget to comply with Oregon local budget law. For the executive director, year-to-date spending includes personnel cost and costs related to our equity consulting, which we are making good progress on our equity work. The positive variance in legal reflects the timing of legal billings received for processing, and we also have a positive variance due to the open position in that division. Finance and administration includes our administration, IT, financial services, board services, and human resources departments. Our positive variance results from 2.5 FTEs in open positions and timing differences for materials and services. We have filled one of those positions at this point, and Lydia has been gaining great grounds as she starts to learn about the district and has been supporting our departments with some of their budget analysis.
She brought cookies today too.
Oh, she did. I missed that part. Planning and Public Affairs also has 2 FTEs in open position year to date, and with staff charging time to the general obligation bond, resulting in a positive variance for the year thus far. This division is also experiencing those timing differences for materials and services spending, including the $500,000 that we had set aside for new responsibilities for the district. And we do have that similar budget amount next year, and we anticipate working with you more closely to make sure that we get moving on that spending for the next fiscal year. Engineering and operations has 1.2 FTEs in open positions, and we're also seeing timing differences in materials and services expense for this division. For general fund debt service, there's been 2 debt service payments for the year, one to the county for our IFA loan, which was a capital loan that transferred over from MCDD, and also a payment to Truist Bank for capital borrowing that transferred over from MCDD as well. In capital projects through February, we've had significant activity on the 13th Avenue Pike project and the PIR. Slide, please. This slide shows the year-to-date spending in the general obligation bond fund. You can see that the spending to date has been for debt issuance costs. We did that bank borrowing at the beginning of the year, $15.7 million. And with that came debt issuance costs. They look like a lot, but this is probably 10 years worth of work on the part of our financial advisors and our bond counsel. They don't bill you for any of their work until you issue debt. And so we got those billings for that length of service that we paid with the first offering. And we have spending on PMLS capital of only $200,000 year to date. We do anticipate seeing that start to ramp up as we work on other projects. So the debt service fund accounts for the general obligation bond debt service. We have completed the first interest payment on the general obligation bonds at $15.7 million with principal and interest payment also due later this year. We've received $1.3 million in property tax revenues for the year. And at this point, we have adequate cash to be able to make that second debt service payment. So that's our balancing act, is to make sure that we collect enough property tax revenues to be able to pay the debt service on those borrowings. And we are being very prudent about the timing of the issuance of the debt on the GEO bond. So we did a first offering to be able to cover our spending, and we do still have funds available to be able to continue our work. We are very committed to making sure that we are managing that expense for our taxpayers. So they experienced less than a penny per thousand on their taxes this year. I think most people probably didn't even notice that it was there, and we anticipate that it will be similar for next year. So with that, I can take any questions on our financials. We do anticipate that our forecast is still pretty accurate, and we will be below budget in all of these areas for this year. And we have anticipated that in the carry forward fund balance that's included in your budget.
Thank you, Lori. Questions?
There's other different information that you can see in the financials, where you learn from somebody else, something that would be beneficial to your review, please let us know.
Thank you. And next up, you're going to talk about the preliminary audit report.
We actually have our auditors here. James Marta is here. He's the partner on our engagement. So I am going to hand things over to him. And talk a little bit about our audit. We're starting into our preliminary audit procedures here in short order. It feels like we just got done, but we're starting again. And so James is going to talk a little bit about each of our responsibilities and how that process will look for the upcoming months. James?
Well, thank you for having me. Can you hear me okay? Very good. So this is a really important part, is the beginning of the audit. We have the audit plan. We've already met with Lori and her team about what we are going to do, but it's really a good opportunity for the board to meet with the auditors, and also if there's any particular things that are happening. I mean, I know about your debt, know what those things are happening. Those are anticipated in the audit. Your organization has streamlined and got more efficient. So government getting more efficient, good thing. I want to move through the slides a little bit and introduce the audit team. And so it's myself, James Marta, I'm the audit partner. Michael Manduca, CPA, is the supervisor, and Yana Dashian is the in charge. So this organization is more streamlined and simplified from the prior years. And so that means that it's going to be easier in accounting and audit. I know that you've got some anticipated bond debt. Our firm does mainly government and nonprofits. We're very familiar with bond debt. Even if you had gotten any other federal funds and grants and stuff, we're familiar with that, but that's for the future. Our deliverables are the audit report. We do issue an internal control letter, and then we have a letter that's communication of those charged with governance. Auditors are required to communicate to the board about responsibilities. And overall, the responsibility of the audit is ours, but the responsibility for the financials is Lori and her team. And so they prepare the financial statements. Lori is very equipped in her team to do that. So they draft the financial statements and then we audit those. An audit really involves not just checking to see if the numbers are right. We look at the design of the controls and what controls we can rely on. We look at how they select accounting principles, and we evaluate whether there's the ability of the district to continue. We know that you're kind of changing, and we're looking at how your funding is, and you're putting that underway. So we'll be looking at your funding plans and how that is working. And they give us access at the records. We look at major contracts. We look at key employees, so any transactions and payments to key employees. And of course, we select key employees for payroll. And so the audit is not just giving assurance on the financials, but we look at those systems and controls, and we do other analysis in conjunction with that. So this is the beginning part of the audit. We have planned the field work for the April-May period, and then the year end is August period. That is a good fit based on when we think that the district will be closed and be able to close and issue the financial statements. So we expect to issue the financial by September 15th. With that, are there any questions or comments regarding the audit plan? Associated with the audit plan, the auditors, we do talk to different members of the administration, of the staff, and then we do reach out to one or two of the board members. So some of you might have experienced that in the past where we have reached out to you and asked questions, because you certainly are part of the governance that we look at.
In the questions? We're in the questions part. Sorry. There you go. Any other questions, comments? All right. Thank you so much for the audit report.
Thank you. Look forward to working with you again.
All right, Lori, next up, you have our insurance review topic. Is that right?
I can see it out. And then do we have slides that are going to show up there?
Yeah.
There we go, looks good. Okay. My name is Marcus Pitts. I'm part of the Brown & Brown insurance brokerage team. And for anybody who doesn't know who we are, we provide services for your insurance coverages each year and the renewals. And we partner with your insurance carriers. You have various carriers for workers' comp, for auto liability packages, cyber liability, and I think a miscellaneous barge policy as well. So we pull that all together. And each year we do a renewal and we will present you with either the good or the bad news, what's going on in the insurance market. So we partner with SDIS, SDAO. This is the insurance pool for
You
special.
want to know what those stand for?
Yes, Special Districts Association of Oregon. And Special Districts Insurance Services is kind of the board that oversees the finances of that. It's 900 members throughout the state of Oregon, 900 plus, that enter into an insurance pool and fund that pool through contributions and then pay for losses and risk management services and those kind of things. So that's who we are, and we work with them. And this year you had a renewal that came through January 1st of the year. And I think you go to the next slide and I'll talk a little bit about that. Major changes this year, obviously. So we had previously 5 different entities that dissolved and merged into one. And you have a new name and a single policy, and that actually came with some benefits that I'm going to highlight in the slides as we go. But now you have one single policy, which administratively is very nice on our end and on your end. And then a couple perks that come along with that too. So we can go to the next. As I mentioned before, you have other policies with us as well that renew in July. This is the bargaining policy that you have, and workers' compensation. And as we're coming up on that, just so you know, you should be pretty flat for this year in terms of workers' comp. So things are looking good on the workers' comp side. We can go to the next one. So one of the advantages of combining all of the entities into a single entity is you have what's called a blanket property insurance policy. If you think of a building, maybe it's $5 million building, and you put it on the schedule for $5 million, on a schedule policy, if you had a loss and then you had to rebuild that building for $6 million, you'd have a delta of $1 million, right? Because it's scheduled for 5, that's all you have insurance on. A blanket policy works a little bit differently in that you have about $35 million worth of property that's on the books. The blanket policy covers everything, so that $5 million building has the advantage of $35 million, $36 million worth of coverage to it. So you no longer have to worry about, are we underinsured? Has cost of construction gone up, inflation and whatnot? You don't have to keep up perfectly with the market any longer. And the trade-off there, or the way that they keep everybody honest, is they'll come out and they'll praise you every 3 to 5 years and make sure that you aren't undervaluing too badly that you have to throw it off your books. So it's a great benefit. And the way that you took advantage of it was there were some in the smaller entities, you had some values on the schedule that were inflated a bit off of the appraised values because you were concerned about if we really had a total loss, what's it actually going to cost us to rebuild it? Well, we don't have to do that any longer. So we were able to drop those down to the appraised values without any additional risk with the benefit of the full policy. And you reduced your overall values by about $9 million. That translated to premium savings of about $12,500, which was very nice. And you have additional coverage limits, the higher coverage limits. So it's kind of a win-win for you. We can go to the next slide. Now, the market as a whole has been seeing
increases for a few years now. And this is cost of construction, it's inflation, it's the reinsurance market that's reacting to some of these large catastrophic losses. The pool with 900 members has to buy very large reinsurance policies that are worldwide. And as you're seeing these large losses roll through, hurricanes, fires, everything that's gone on, the reinsurance market reacts to that and premiums go up. So we've been seeing that go for probably 4 or 5 years now. It's been increasing pretty dramatically. Last year was another one of those years. This year's looking a little bit better. The market seems to have corrected itself, but going into January of this year, FDIS was warning everybody, just brace yourself. You could see up to a 20% increase in the overall insurance. It ended up landing at about, I think the member average is about 18%, but they were warning everybody about 20%. Workers' compensation, as I mentioned, has been in a better state. So that's staying fairly flat. And it's also dependent on your loss experience, which has been fine. And you should see a fairly flat year this year as well. And then cyber has actually dropped a little bit over the years, mainly because people are doing a better job of protecting themselves and losses are a little bit less and the market has matured a bit. So cyber has actually decreased. Last year, premium, if we combine all 5 of your entities together, is about $153,000. And we'll flip to the next slide and see what happened this year. Total altogether for your package premium, $173,000. That's about 13%. I will point out there's a $25,000 discount. That's due to your administrative team doing a good job of best practices. If you're able to fill out a survey and mark yes on all of the loss prevention safety, then you get a discount. So they were able to take advantage of that, which is nice. So 13%, you beat the overall market average, mainly because of some of those property savings that we're talking about too. I think we can go to the next. I like to include this just so you have it on file so you know where you stand. So you have a liability policy that covers $10 million of liability losses in any given year. A $0 deductible, it's called the standard plan. It's where it's a good place to be. We do look from time to time if you have the appetite to bump those deductibles up a little bit if you're going to save much money doing that. But honestly, you're doing pretty well where you're at with the liability deductible. And we'll look every year to make sure there's not an obvious savings there. Property and equipment, you have a $1,000 deductible in that blanket limit. Sorry, that 39 million was an old figure. It's now down to 35. So crime, you have a $10,000 deductible. This is like employee dishonesty, those kinds of things, and $1 million in coverage on crime. Cyber, you have a $150,000 limit through the policy, and then an additional cyber policy that was put on this year. We're bumping that up to $1 million of cyber, which is nice to have. And then auto, zero liability deductible, and $10 million of coverage there as well. So that is it in a nutshell. I know insurance isn't the most interesting thing in the world, but I can field any questions if you guys like them.
Thank you, Mark. It is the most interesting thing because I'm on an insurance agency. Fascinating.
Risk business after all.
Yeah.
Questions, comments?
Thank you, Chair. So the limit that you showed on cyber and then mentioned the increased limit, it just made me wonder, is the SCADA system or the computer hardware that's associated with our actual capital covered under cyber or under property and equipment?
Yeah, that's always a question that comes down to the claim itself, but cyber would cover it if it's loss was a cyber event, yes. The SCADA equipment itself, if it's damaged by some other form cause of loss, then it would be covered under your equipment.
So hypothetically, if there was a cyber attack that disrupted the operation of the pump stations and caused other damage, would that be subject to the cyber limit or to other limits?
It would likely be under the cyber policy in that case. And that would
Something to think about. I've been improving our security on the SCADA system.
For the comparison, you mentioned the combination of the districts is a big change for this year. What was the comparison for exposure for the prior year? Was it a specific district or?
Meaning like how much did you pay in premium? Or-
Yeah, so I'm looking at it's blurry. It's a little hard to see, but there's significant changes between last year and this year from an exposure standpoint. So I'm wondering what the unit of analysis was for exposure with the past districts.
Are we talking about the total insured value of the properties? Or-
Yeah, I'm on it.
Which was about 44. Okay. Which year is that one from?
It was comparison of 2024 to 2025.
Yeah. So that one I purposely didn't include in slides because that's an auto-generated pace comparison, and it's going to be garbled by the change of entities. So ultimately, the comparison that I pulled for you was 153,000 total up to whatever that was, 170 something, which was 13% overall. That'll get back on track next year. That blurry sheet that you're looking at. But with the changeover this year, it wasn't a good comparison for you. Yeah. What's that?
Wasn't apples to apples.
Right, exactly.
The deductibles seem pretty minimal. You know, like what the cost savings would be, or could we look at, I mean, it's not common to have, a $10,000 deductible versus $1,000.
You're right, and they will quote it for us each renewal as we go through. I don't know that they would do it midterm, but we could certainly ask for a quote on different.
Well, I think we should know whether or not we want to sure to some degree if the savings is worth it. It may not be worth it. But I think definitely on the next renewal that if it's
The budget's adopted, we'll have a little contingency. That'll be good to go with that.
Quick one. Thanks. Is this campus facility covered for flood insurance or for flood damage?
Yes, it is.
Okay, is that a separate rider or a separate policy? I'm looking at the exclusion list and floods, obviously.
Yeah. You have a slightly separate deductible for flood. It is part of the package policy. And it is, I believe it's $25,000 deductible automatically, or 5% of the total insured value of the property itself. So it's a little bit higher than your $1,000 typical deductible. There are options to purchase additional flood policies outside and bring those in. But to this point, you've stuck with the $25,000 deductible.
So that's a deductible, but then our coverage goes under that total umbrella. Okay, thank you.
Mark, does that include earthquake?
Earthquake is similar too. It has a separate deductible, 5% total insured value of the property.
Questions, comments? All right. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
It's a little awkward to be the flood safety agency talking about purchasing flood insurance.
All right, we are ahead of schedule. Jim, did you want to, I noticed that you have the director's report, or did you?
No, I mean, it's written. I can always talk if you want me to.
I did have a question too about, some of us are going on a tour tomorrow.
Yes.
Are you going to talk about that?
I can. I think I sent you all out an email during this meeting, actually, so you haven't had a chance to see it yet. But if you can plan to meet here at 1 o'clock, and we should be wrapped up by 4. I think your calendar hold might be a little longer, but I think we're planning, we decided not to be out on West Marine Drive at 5 o'clock. Just didn't feel like a fun afternoon for everyone. So we're gonna wrap up by 4 here at the campus. So we're gonna focus on the east side for this tour. But I think just where you're gonna be in and out of a van. And so we're,
Sensible shoes.
yeah, we're close that you want to do that, and we'll bring PPE or anything else you might need.
Emily, I'm gonna have him with me. I can bring my car. I can follow my car.
Let me check and see.
Okay.
But yeah, that sounds good. We can
We're
figure
working
that out.
on a rental van. We had one today that we're returning, and it did have a no pets policy. And I don't know whether a service dog.
Service dog doesn't count.
Okay.
So should be able to ride on my truck.
Okay.
No boat, right?
No
Now,
The boat tour is more fun, but less
Boat
informative.
tour is so fun.
Yeah,
Take
it on.
Sounds like it'd be a good day for it.
I was looking for.
You know, if the boat's in the water, I don't think it's free, is it?
I don't think we've done that yet, but also most of the projects that we'll be showing you can't really see.
Yeah.
A lot of them you can't see, but that doesn't mean you should turn it down when you get to it.
Dime it with the Springer run.
What's that?
Can you dime it with the spring Chinook run?
Oh, yeah.
Got a smoker right out here.
All right, is there anything else for the good of the order?
So thank you all very much. Get in touch if you need anything.
All right, next meeting virtual. We will see you on the 15th. Meeting is adjourned.